I'm pretty sure that's good. Let's talk about Phoenicia. Super quick, I did want to share this map. I found that on Reddit on map porn. It's honestly really cool. I think this user just made it. I don't remember the name, but I'll write it down somewhere. It shows Phoenicia and not just the major cities, but also some of the resources that you can find along the coastline. Things like timber, dye, wool, stuff like that. Typically, the Phoenicians are known for things like dye and wood, but they did a lot more than that. Let's get into it. Phoenicia occupied the coast of the Levant, also known as the Eastern Mediterranean. Their major cities included, I've only read them, so I'm probably going to butcher the names, but Tyre, Sidon, Byblos, and Arwad. And those would probably be from the Persian division. We'll get into that in a bit. So the craftsmanship was definitely one of Phoenicia's... I have my cat down here. The craftsmanship was definitely one of Phoenicia's grip on the world, especially since they didn't really have a militarized culture or anything. A lot of what kept them safe for as long as they were, because they had a good amount of autonomy for the majority of their existence. And the reason being is because they were all just artists and craftsmen and maritime traders. Like that was their thing. It was just like a huge cluster of cities dedicated to merchandise. You'll also notice along the coastline, if I pop the map up back again, there aren't any agricultural features. That's because the land there didn't really serve itself to being farmed, I guess. For whatever reason, I didn't really look into it. It was either not fertile or whatever, but that's just not what the Phoenicians did. They were like, oh, it can't grow corn. I guess we'll make pottery instead, which, I mean, if there's a lot of clay in the ground and you do see a lot of pottery from this time period, that's probably a reason why. Let's talk about the origins of Phoenicia. As it turns out, Phoenicians wasn't really the name that they called themselves. It's not one that they went by. The moniker was actually given to them by their buddies, the Greeks. So around the first millennium BC, they called the people from the civilization, I'm going to write it on here because I don't know the pronunciation, but it was like, it looks like the word phoenix. Phoenix. And that's most likely a descriptor for the color purple. And I'll get into that in just a second. I know, we're trying to go in chronological order, so you're just going to have to wait and leave questions for the end. Other meanings of phoenix may coincide with a type of palm that grew there. We also know there's an instrument that was also known as the phoenix, finnoy, whatever. It might have even been a name for the color of their skin, because these people were maritime traders. You can imagine that these people were quite tan, or maybe just a little toasty from the sun. So this cluster of cities really didn't start springing up until around the 1500s BC. Some scholars don't even believe that Phoenicians really honed in their identity until the appearance of the Sea People. So one school of thought is that the Sea People came and conquered the surrounding settlements. That's the more popular theory. One of the other theories is that the Sea Peoples conquered the Phoenicians themselves, but there's just no evidence of destruction around that time period that would suggest the Sea Peoples might have conquered or anything, but there is evidence around the surrounding areas. And I believe those excavations date back to the 70s. I'd have to check. The identity of the Phoenicians and those early settlements before the Sea Peoples, or maybe even during the Sea Peoples, who knows, was Canaanite. And that's just true for the entire region. It's the same as if you say you're Italian, but you are also European. So it's like you can have a separate identity, but a region as a whole, you are another identity. So anyway, the theory goes that if the Sea Peoples really did kind of come and destroy a lot of, or not destroy, but I guess conquered a lot of the surrounding areas, it really did kind of shift their culture enough to let Phoenicia stand on its own and cultivate its own identity, separate from the Sea People and their newly conquered areas. So let's fast forward to 1200 BCE. Egypt is tanking a little. So by 1175 BC, they kind of leave Phoenicia to its own devices. There did come and go a couple randoms for a second. The Philistines, the Israelites, they settled somewhere along the southern Levant, but there didn't seem to be a lot of bothering or a lot of poking with the Phoenicians up until the Hellenistic period of like 300 BC. I guess that's if you don't count what was going on with the Persians in 539 to 332 BC. It's easy to look over, but no worries. So it's 539 BC, and Cyrus the Great takes Babylon. Oh, he's the Persian king, by the way. So the Phoenicians saw this and kind of went, peace in the Middle East, or Mediterranean, or whatever, and just surrendered right away. Just didn't even put up a fight. They said, this guy, he took a place in, we're okay with that, whatever, take us. As we said before, Phoenicia wasn't a military people. There was no tradition for that. So it only makes sense for them to kind of see this actual militarized civilization and say, we're literally not prepared to defend ourselves. So Cyrus was actually pretty chill. He gave them a considerable amount of autonomy. There aren't even records, and maybe there was some, we just haven't uncovered them yet, or they don't exist. There were no records of Persian administrators ever visiting the Phoenician city-states. Even the Phoenician king was allowed to stay in power. Maybe it was like a figurehead thing, or they thought it would be a figurehead thing, but he really did kind of retain his word over his own people. That's probably why this moment in history can be easily overlooked, is because Phoenicia didn't really change fundamentally at this point. It was really just kind of a change in management. So the Phoenicians were known for quite a few things. We'll go over their crafts, trading, and sailing. So earlier I had mentioned the color purple and their association with it. Phoenicians invented a purple dye known as Tyrian purple. It was actually really lucrative and one of their more in-demand things that they made. And that color actually came from a local sea snail called the murex. I'll put a picture here. This dye was expensive because as you can see, there's like the shell here. I've seen a couple pictures of people holding one, and it really just kind of fits in the palm of your hand. Not really sure how big they get, but if they were farming these pretty often, I would assume that they wouldn't get that big because they probably wouldn't let them grow that big. It was an extremely tedious process. I believe it took around a week and a half to let the purple really come to its own. So not only was this thing time consuming, but also you needed thousands of these little palm-sized murex shells in order to produce just 1 ounce of the dye. And because of how expensive it was and how time consuming it was, this really was a color that was reserved for royalty and the elite. At some point in time, we even see the Romans outlaw the use of Tyrian purple by any lower class people. You had to be of a certain tax bracket. And I believe breaking that law came with prison time, which is nuts. I found a really cool anecdote while I was researching this, is that Cleopatra was actually supposedly very obsessed with this color. She had dyed her sails this Tyrian purple. And as you can imagine, sails are very big. It's just giant canvas, or I don't know what they might have been made of back then. The 1 ounce from thousands of murex shells, and then you're making multiple sails. Actually, it may have been just one sail, but still, that's a huge amount of dye. Cleopatra was sitting pretty at this point. Anyway, by the late 8th century BC, we are starting to see Phoenicia create trading posts across most of the Mediterranean, if not the entirety. There's actually excavations of a lot of these sites that show some of the really cool crafts and goods that they would trade with other civilizations. Another very important trade that Phoenicia was into was that of cedar. Cedar was very straight, strong, and it had a very pleasant smell. If you don't know what cedar smells like, I suggest you go to your nearest Marshall's or maybe Target. there has to be a candle there that probably says like cedar wood and balsam or something, or cedar wood and tobacco. It smells really good. And they had entire forests of this stuff, so I can't imagine how great Phoenicia must have smelled. Like snails and wood. Anyway, because of how straight and strong and whatever it was, these were awesome for making boats. And this was an incredibly important feature Phoenicia kind of took the corner of the market on, because other civilizations were really struggling, or the bigger civilizations at the time, I should say, were really struggling with boat making, and it's because of their lack of wood. Egypt and Mesopotamia just did not have that luxury or that resource. Egypt did have palm trees, but you try making a boat out of palm trees. You can't. Reason being is the inside of them was actually really pithy. It's just like kind of a porous wood. It's not very strong. It's not even pliable without just snapping and being dumb and gross. And it's not good wood. Palm trees don't make good wood. So at this point, you're probably like, wow, Phoenicia had everything. They were artists, they would sail the world, and they were offering their beautiful pieces to so many different civilizations. What else could they possibly have to offer? Well, my friends, that would be the alphabet. Let's backtrack here really quick. So Greece tanks. Greece is going through a dark age. We see a loss of written language. Greece can't make a freaking grocery list, okay? I mean, at some point, we know the Greeks did have some kind of a written word, because sometime around the late Bronze Age, there is examples of bilinear script and whatnot, but the late Bronze Age collapse happens, and they just forget. They forget their entire written language. But come around 7th century BCE, evidence emerges of the Phoenician language being used to write out Greek words. So what I mean by this is the characters of the alphabet are used interchangeably. So the same way that I can write a word in English, I can write it in Spanish using the same alphabet. We see this on something called the Nestor's Cup. You can see some of its inscriptions. It is considered one of the oldest surviving examples of the Greek alphabet. Between you and me, we know it's Phoenician inspired. Well, you, me, and Brown University, where I found this information. Here's what the cup translates to. I am Nestor's cup, good to drink from. Whoever drinks this cup empty, straightway desire for beautiful crowned Aphrodite will seize him. That's kind of cute. So, like all good things, Phoenicia does come to an end. Like I mentioned before, Phoenicians weren't a violent people. They were craftsmen, and they served as basically a crutch for some of the bigger civilizations at the time. Unfortunately, 572 BCE does come around, and they fall under the rule of the Assyrians. This kind of just marks the beginning of an end. Trade routes become a lot harder with the Greek competition now. And as the 4th century dawns on Phoenicia, her two great cities, Sidon and Tyre, are destroyed by the Persians and Alexander the Great. So a lot of Phoenicians at this point are left untethered, and we see a lot of them immigrate to Greece. Others just kind of assimilate with their newfound rulers and just kind of melt away to history. But you can't not say that when it was their time, they were a pretty inspirational people. I mean, you had this kind of basically community of artists, and they thrived by what they could provide the people around them. They left behind so much beautiful work. They essentially saved Greece with the written language. They made these incredible boats that we find in different Egyptian excavations now. You know, they're just not around anymore. I mean, their art and their influence lives on, but the people themselves have just, they're gone. Yeah, I'm really sorry for the sad ending. I actually really enjoyed looking this up, but yeah.